Welcome back to the first real video of advanced iOS tutorials. Today I wanted to start going over my most requested topic, and that is how do I handle login credentials when I'm coding an iOS app? Um, I'm just going to go over the brief overview right now on that. The next video I'll go over what the code looks like, certain things you have to take into consideration, how it's actually handled at an enterprise level, and a couple gotchas too. But for this one, it's just going to be the broad overview. Now, first thing to keep in mind is, just as a brief review, why do we need authentication? Well, that's because of bad actors. We got hackers. We have people trying to do bad things on the back end, trying to access that data. So the server needs a way of locking that down while still allowing the app access to those resources. So there's a couple different methods of authentication. The first one is basic authentication, which is the most lightweight, but also the least secure out of the three that I'm just going to go over real quick. The second one are JWTs, i.e. JSON Web Tokens. These are basically just JSON payloads with something called an access token and potentially a refresh token in them as well. That's the one that is primarily used out in the industry that you'll see. But the third one is also used quite frequently, but not as much as far as building a small full stack solution, and that is using OAuth 2.0. Now, OAuth is primarily for like third-party resources. It's a big enough topic where I'll go over that in another video outside of this small series. But the two you need to keep in mind when building your own full stack solutions or your own iOS products where you control both the backend and the app are basic authentication and JWTs. So when it comes to these two, what you'll notice in what I've done in the past is I use basic authentication for endpoints that can be really made public, but I just add that in as an extra layer of security. And all basic authentication is you are taking a username string, a password string, you're combining those with an equal sign in the middle, you're base 64 encoding those, the whole thing, and then you're sending that to the back end with your request. That's it. That's all it is. As you might notice, that's not really secure because you're only using base 64 encoding, and anyone who grabs that can just unencode it and see what the username and password is. Usually when you use that, at least from my experience, you have a system user on the back end that has a complex password that you just store in the app. And that's used for any endpoint that uses basic authentication. You're not creating new users with that. It's just that one. The nice thing about that is you can reset the password whenever you need to if it's compromised. But in reality, you're not using that for any endpoint that really requires security. It's just kind of like an extra layer. Now, the one you want to keep in mind for the main endpoints that you want to secure are JSON Web Tokens. Now, I'll show you a little bit on what that looks like. I'll go into Postman here. So if you look at the bottom right here, this is what the JSON Web Token actually looks like. It's literally just a JSON token. Now, I'll go over the flow here in a second, but the JSON Web Token always has an access token. The access token is just a very long string. How long it is depends on your own implementation of this. It always has some sort of expiry amount, and this is in seconds usually. It's got a token type. There's a few different types. I won't go over that now, but just know that you can have a token type. This isn't always necessary. The only reason that this is here right now for me is because I'm using Django REST framework with a OAuth framework or library that automatically puts these in. The scope is for permissions, and we won't go over that now. And then optionally a refresh token. The refresh token is used to grab another new JSON Web Token that has the exact same payload you see here. The refresh token is really only necessary if you want perpetual login. So for instance, if you have like a banking app, this access token might only be valid for, we'll say, 15 minutes, and then you might have to refresh and get another one. For low priority apps, it just need a couple endpoints that are secure, but you want to stay perpetually logged in. Once the access token expires, or I should say about 5 to 10 minutes beforehand, or maybe even a week beforehand, you can see if the access token expires. If it does, you can use the refresh token to fetch a new access token to replace the old one, and that cycle continues in perpetuity, or unless you actually manually revoke the token on the back end. That is how a lot of these apps will continually keep you logged in forever, but still maintain a level of security where if someone steals an access token, you can still revoke it and get a new access token with a refresh token and invalidate the old one. So that is what a JWT looks like. Now, if we want to go over the full overview here, let me go over to Miro real quick. So one thing you want to take a look at is the overall flow of how authentication is handled. So if I'm a user, put yourself in the user standpoint, and I'm opening an app up. The first thing that most of them are going to do is ask you to log in. The login process usually includes either a third-party login, Apple, Google, Facebook, or email and password. Now, for the sake of this, I'm just going to go over the email and password one. Pretty ubiquitous. Every app has it in some way, shape, or form. So the first step is the user actually types in their credentials and logs in. And like I said before, this is one of those endpoints that you can secure using basic authentication, and that those credentials would be baked within the app and the user doesn't see them, and it would be just sent along with this request. You don't really need it, but if you really are want to be paranoid about it, I guess. Side note, paranoia when it comes to security is a good thing. So if you want to secure this endpoint with basic auth, you can do that. But anyway, user logs in. The request is sent to the backend. The backend will validate those credentials, so username and password. If it's an actual user that exists on the server and the password is correct, the backend will create a JSON Web Token. It's going to create an access token string, an expires amount in seconds usually, and then send back any other information that you need. And you can put anything in these JWTs as well. There are frameworks to do this for you, and I highly recommend you find one if you're building the backend out that does this for you. Security is one of those things that personally I don't recommend anyone try to build this from the ground up by themselves. There's libraries out there, highly recommend them. There's open source communities that maintain these things. Just use one of those. Save yourself a lot of time, effort, and hair, and just use a framework or library for this. So after the server creates the JSON Web Token, it's going to send it back to the app. Now, this is, I think, the part where a lot of developers get mixed up once they have it. I've seen developers save actual user passwords on the app to fetch these things. You never do that. Never, ever, 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 and I can't emphasize this enough, never save user credentials on the app. That's what you use tokens for. If a person somehow gets access to the app or someone's iCloud or however you're doing it, and they have those credentials, they can use those to hack other people, hack the person that they're targeting. Just it's bad practice. Just don't do it. JSON Web Token, since it's a token, it's more secure because if someone steals that token, they only have access to those resources maybe for a day, 15 minutes, however you have it. But the point is it can be revoked, and they can't use that to access an individual's other services. So say if I use the same password with an email as the app, a hacker can't take a token and log into the user's email. So avoid saving user credentials within the app at all costs. Just don't do it. So once the app has the JWT, what do you do with it? Well, you want to save it in Keychain. You can save it in user defaults if you do your own encryption and encrypt it a certain way. Generally speaking, you want it to be encrypted. Keychain does that for you. So you don't have to worry about trying to implement some algorithm or encryption yourself. Save it in the keychain. The way I usually do it is I create a object, kind of like an abstraction around it, and then I just save the individual values as a JSON payload within the keychain. There's libraries out there that help you do this to access keychain. Highly recommend you do that if you're new to it, or you can roll out your own solutions. The keychain APIs are fairly straightforward, but you keep that in keychain. At that point, the user is considered logged in. If the app has access to the backend endpoints, the user is considered logged in. Now, most backends, if you send the auth token to the backend, they will use that auth token to tell what user it is. An auth token is associated with the user on the backend. That's how these things are working. You don't have to send user data to the backend every time. As long as the backend understands that that token exists, it should automatically link that with the user. So all you need to consider the user logged in on the app is just the existence of that token. So as long as that exists in the keychain, the user should be considered logged in. That's why the next step is you fetch for the login data. So this is where you use that token, you send it back, and if I want to go to Postman real quick, I'll just give you a sneak peek. It's added into the request in the headers area. Let's see if I can actually go to a endpoint that uses it. This authorization content or header right here that you can see. And the value is bearer, and case matters in this, by the way. Bearer, there's a space in here. There's always a space. And then the actual token gets appended right after that space. Side note, when I was learning this, I spent about 24 hours figuring out how you do this, and I was missing the space. It wasn't fun for me. But anyway, the key is authorization, case matters again, and then the value is bearer, space, the token you want to send to the backend. That's how you send this auth token in a request. Now if I go back to my flowchart here. So in the request, you put the auth token. The next thing is the server will validate the request using the token, and it will send that data back. Again, the token is used to associate what user is making the request. Then the app gets the login data or whatever you need, and then it will visually log in the user. So this is the part where you code it into the app. Even though the user is considered logged in when they get the first access token, you don't really have any login data at that point. Now, if you don't have any login data, you can just navigate the user right to the home screen or dashboard, whatever the first screen in the app flow is. But usually how I do it is I'll make two requests and I'll combine them together. The first request is to fetch the token. The second request is to fetch any data you need to log the user in. And after that, you navigate them to whatever the first page is. That is the full process. That's what's happening in the background. So when you see a spinner when you're logging in, that's usually what's happening. There might be a couple other steps if you're using a third-party service like Apple Login or Google Login, Facebook, what have you. But generally speaking, this is the full process. Now, things to keep in mind that I've added in these little notes down here. When the user is considered logged in as long as the auth token exists. If the auth token does not exist or it's expired, the app should automatically log the user out. There's different methods on how to do that. I won't go over it right now in this video. In one of the future videos, I'll mention how that's done. When the user logs out, you have to remove the keychain value with the auth token. Just do it because if the app sees that there's something still there, it's going to consider it as the user still logged in. You got to have to remove that. So keep that in mind. Here's the gotcha though. I didn't want to move that around. If you are using Keychain and the user uninstalls the app, that's not a logout event, right? So if they uninstall the app without logging out, that value will still exist in the Keychain because it's like part of their iCloud. So it persists between installs. Now, I'll go over this in a little bit more when we get into the code, but how you get around this is you want to use a user default Boolean value. Now, user defaults, if a user uninstalls the app, they clear out. So that means you can have a Boolean, you can call it like first open or did launch first or what have you. That will default to false when the user installs the app. As soon as the app opens for the first time, set it to true. Before you set it to true, check to see if there's a value in Keychain for that token and remove it. Then you set that Boolean value to true. Hey, I first opened. Everything's cleaned up. We're in a good state to log the user in. Proceed normally from here on out. Then after the user, closes the app or opens it back or logs out and logs back in, that value will say, hey, we already handled looking to clear this out automatically because the user already installed it and already opened it up for the first time. So just skip that step. So you just got to make sure that you handle the subsequent installs and uninstalls correctly for this method to work. And that's pretty much it. So this is the broad overview of how authentication works. I hope that this clears at least a little bit up. I will be going over the code itself in the next video. Just for the sake of this video, user logs in, server returns an access token, usually JWT. App stores that JWT in the keychain. So you use Keychain APIs that Apple provides or a third-party library. The existence of that means that the user is logged in. App sends a request to the backend to fetch any login data or anything it needs, and then the server comes back with that data, and then you push the user to any navigation view that you want, home view, dashboard, what have you. And that's how you do it. Leave any comments down below if you have any questions or you want me to expand on things as I build this series up. The next video I plan on doing, again, like I said before, is the programming side of things. What does this actually look like in code? And one thing that I want to do as well for everyone here is I want to actually show you a backend on how this is done. That's going to be Django. So again, leave a comment, like, subscribe if you want to continue seeing more videos like this. And let me know in the comments if you wanted me to expand on anything or you want to see a certain video in here. So that's it for right now. So everyone have a good one and happy coding.